the American Hotel was above Al's Bar, and that was a hangout. It was across the street from the original Lace, which was on Traction Way, warehouse district. This was mid and late 70s. Yeah, between 75 and 79. Artists were starting to move downtown to that area, very raw, raw lofts. And the American Hotel project, it was actually a hotel. It was like not a very good hotel. It was kind of, I remember I put up an artist there that I was sponsoring because I was doing FAR at the same time. The show that I was in there was, I remember Robert Smith was in it, and I think Paul was in it. And I decided to do it in one of the hotel rooms so that you could only see it from the two doors that led into the hotel room. Al's Bar was a great place to hang out. There was nowhere down in that neighborhood. There were no stores, no coffee houses, no laundromats. There was nothing there. There was just artists and Lace. And so Al's Bar became a hangout. And I don't remember Al. Was there an Al? I don't remember an Al. So I have no idea where Al's Bar came from. So that's it. I mean, just artists hanging out at a bar, basically. And the American Hotel was not always used for art. It was a hotel. I think the exhibit I was in was called Spirit. I can't remember the name of it even, but it was a performance festival. 75.
And to go to graduate school.
Yeah, it was sort of set up for me. I was at Nova Scotia College of Art and Design for undergraduate school, which was an extraordinary school. I mean, really extraordinary. I learned so much there. I think much more than at CalArts, I have to say. And I was so young and naive. I was just making work that they kept saying, "Oh, you've got to go to CalArts. You've got to quit." I didn't know what CalArts was. In fact, I don't even know what Nova Scotia College of Art and Design was before I got there. I did the first year I was there. I did weaving. I wove this huge Scottish tartan. I made it up because I wanted to have a family emblem because my family was like gone. So I made a Scottish tartan, and then I met Vito Conchi, and that ended weaving. And I just went, this guy's really interesting, and went into that. But yeah, so it was sort of set up, back then I guess they made a phone call. They said, "Well, we got a student for you." My graduate class there were only 5 students.
Who were they?
Jill Gigrich, who had a pretty rich career early on in the 70s, late 70s into the early 80s, and then she pulled out. But she recently had a show at Tom Jimerson, Cardwell Jimerson. She's a very interesting woman. Who else was in my class? Ann Preston. This guy who had a mustache and wore army fatigues. He was a Vietnam vet. He was really interesting. He liked trouble. He really liked trouble. And 2 other people, I don't remember. Mitchell, Syrup? Mitchell might have been in my class, or maybe he was, I don't remember exactly. We were at school at the same time, but he may have been a year earlier, below me. So it was a very small class, and we stuck together, and we had, it was the same deal as it is today. Nothing's changed, not even the furniture, I have to say, in those studios at the art department. The same furniture, same, everything's the same, the chairs, the tables. Anyway, I even remember the ones when I come back, whether to teach or to do presentations, I remember sitting in certain chairs going, "Oh, it's that one." It just wobbles in a particular way. It's that one, they haven't really changed it. So I came in 75, and that was right after the feminist program. It was gone. I don't even know what happened. I mean, it had this huge reputation, but it wasn't there. Paul Brock was still there. was Paul there the first? He was there the first year, and then he was gone too. Doug Hubler came in to take his place. Doug was great. I really loved Doug Hubler. Michael was there, the same old, I call him the Cheshire Cat. We laughed the same. I don't laugh that way anymore, but we had a similar laughter. You know, Michael's laughter, he almost stops breathing and kind of chokes and turns red. Well, I don't know why, I had the same laughter, and we would just fall off the chairs laughing, I mean, encouraging each other. All the students were just, it was uproar almost every time. Anyway, I call him the Cheshire Cat because he's very cunning, but he's sort of up in the tree looking down at you with his, I always kind of see him as if his mouth is full of lit light bulbs. You know, like, I love Michael. Actually, I worked with Michael in Nova Scotia. I was in '72 for many weeks. I was asked by Casper Koenig to, they were doing a book on Michael, and there was barely any documentation of his late 60s work. So I was hired to drag it out of him, his memories of what happened. And it was very difficult. He had a very hard time putting sentences together even, coherently. We worked really hard on putting together documentary text. It was great to see him at CalArts. I had no idea he was at CalArts. I didn't go knowing anything. The first time I met Vito, it's another impulse story. Oh my God. I left the weaving studio in the evening. I was working really late on the Scottish tartan on a huge 8-harness, loom, like really authentic. My father was a textile engineer, and that's why that was the impulse. Anyway, I left the weaving studio to go to the library. It's a long hallway. There was a man standing in front of the library door, so I couldn't go in. And the man was naked, and I remember he was really hairy. And I'm just facing him and like sort of waiting for him to move, but he's not moving. He's just staring at me, and it's only us in the hallway. So I just stand and look at him, and he starts pulling hairs off of his chest one by one and sticking his penis between his legs to make a vagina. I'm just like staring, going, wow, I knew nothing. I mean, I had no art history experience. I was 20 years old. I knew nothing, but this was so compelling and weird to me, and I had no idea who he was. I stayed there for maybe, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 minutes watching him, and then I got bored and left. And he was waiting for the next person. The next day I remember going to school and telling one of my classmates, I saw the weirdest thing last night. It was in front of the library. I explained it to him, and he said, oh that's Vito Conchi. I said, huh, who's that? Oh, he's just a really important artist. He's doing some of his experimental, psychophysical work. And it was really fascinating, because it was so much about my watching him that spurred him to do what he was doing. It was so private, public at the same time. It really did amazing work or whatever.
Yeah.
Farr was, so when I became very close friends with Baldessari, with John. Well, John, had his studio, probably other people have told you this, he had his studio in Santa Monica on Bay Street, and essentially all of his students always hung out there. We were at his studio almost every day. And all of his friends used to visit, so Lawrence Weiner and Schwarzkopfler, blah, blah, who had, people were always there, artists. So his studio was more like NSCAD. It was more like this energy of people hanging out together and passing books around and just, talking, reading, drinking. That was always happening. And so I needed a job, and so John introduced me to Morgan Thomas, who at the time had a very small gallery in Santa Monica, and was showing mostly kind of minimalist painting and literary work. And they knew each other. So I got a job working at the Morgan Thomas Gallery. And through me and my friends, she started becoming interested in contemporary experimental work, showed Jack Goldstein and Al Ruppersberg and Doug Hubler and a number of artists, mostly men, of course. That was an era of men, by the way. And women loved them. We loved all the artists, but silently we were totally pissed off, of course. Not because they were making it, because they totally deserved it, but that there was not a lot of opportunities for us. So it's slightly different than the feminist movement in a way. I never considered myself like a tough feminist, even though, culture pissed me off. It always pisses me off as a woman, always. But I didn't begrudge them that they had what they had, because they were really incredible artists. So I started working for her, and she, in 77, I worked for her 76, the second year of my graduate school at CalArts. And she was very frustrated that the gallery, she couldn't do a whole lot with the artists. She had a very small gallery. She was more interested in process than in presentation, and she got very frustrated. So she had this idea to start a nonprofit that would work in the production, producing artists, more as a production kind of machine, and get very connected and collaborative with the artist even. And she got Claire Copley, who had a fabulous gallery for a few years. Funny if you want to hear an anecdote about Claire. Claire was quite young. She was the first to show Michael Asher. She did some amazing shows. When I connected with Claire again in 2008, I did a huge far reunion for the 70s, early 80s people at the Grinstein's home. And Claire came from New York, and I asked her, I said, how did you get so connected, and so kind of ahead of the times, how did you do that? And she was on her own. She said, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I just listened to people and pulled things out, but it was easy. In other words, it was like there was not a whole lot of stress or tension about how to do what you're doing. You just want to do it, you do it, so it was a very tongue time. I thought that was very interesting, because I really thought she had it like together, but I rather prefer that it's the way it is, that it's not quite pre-thought. So Connie Llewellyn, who had been working for Gagosian early on when he first started, and he had a really small space in Venice. And in fact, I remember I lived in a storefront on Pico and Lincoln in Santa Monica, and because of FAR, so this I was already involved with FAR. Several artists would stay at my studio, and I remember Barbara Kruger came. I had known her from New York tangentially before, but she stayed at my studio, and she was having her first show at the Gagosian Gallery. And it was the first time I saw, or LA saw, her red frames with the black and white graphics. And I noticed that she was wearing the same color nail polish and lipstick. That was like really great to notice that. Anyway, that's an anecdote. So Claire and Morgan and Connie put together FAR. And it was a nonprofit from the beginning. It had no money. I think it was supported minimally by Morgan's then husband, who was a lawyer, Jim Butler, and a collector and a patron of, he was a patron of James Lee Byers, particularly, others as well, but especially him. He was always also connected to the Lannan Foundation. He was very involved in books and literature. And Morgan was married to him at the time. And so that was the little money that they had. So she was able to rent a space on 814 South Spring Street. I remember the address. But before she had that space, she did 2 projects, one with John Baldessari and one with James Lee Byers. And then opened this space, but never used it. She pulled out. Claire had already left LA and moved to New York. Connie had left LA and moved to San Francisco. And Morgan, after the Byers show, came to me. I was an assistant working for her. She said, I can't do this anymore. Do you want it? I said, want what? Want far. I said, want it? What do you mean want it? Well, I'm not going to do it anymore, so I'm giving it to you. Why don't you do it? I said, do it? Do what? What are you talking about? You know, it's like, it was like being given a newborn baby, you know, on your doorstep going, well, yeah, you're going to take care of the baby if it's left there and it's vulnerable and needs nurturing. So I felt like, okay, I'll figure this out. I had no clue, not a clue. The first year was already, or the first half year was already scheduled by Morgan. The first person that was supposed to come out was Jack Goldstein. And Jack had this kind of aura that preceded him, or proceeded him, because he left LA, but he was like this to the young artist, and I was a young artist, just graduated, a little cult hero. Jack Goldstein's coming? Like, oh gee, I better get someone to like help me. I don't know, like, what do I do, you know? So I asked Christina, David Askevold's wife, they were living in Venice, if she wanted to do it with me. No experience, neither of us had any experience. I knew her from NSCAD, but I hated her in NSCAD because she was like really mean and wouldn't talk to me. So when I re-met her in LA, I told her, so I said, Christina, you were kind of a bitch back then. She goes, you're right. And we became best friends. So anyway, so we did this together, and we just kind of put it together. We really didn't know what we were doing. I'll never forget Jack showing up. He was really gray, like New York kind of gray for LA, kind of green gray, dark glasses. The space was like an empty cement box, you know, cement. The whole thing was cement, walls, floor, ceiling, and we had nowhere for him to stay. And you know, we didn't prepare. We didn't. I mean, we just didn't know what to think, how to think it through, even, or what he was going to do, or how we were going to help him, or who was going to come. All this stuff was to be figured out. So I thought, well, I'll just go out and buy a futon and a sheet, and so at least he could sleep. So I went to him. I said, Jack, I'm going to go, you know, down the street and see what I can find, you know, sheets and whatnot. He says, I don't need any sheets. I don't need any mattress. I'll just sleep on the floor. Okay. That's kind of rough. That's what he did. And we produced The Jump. You know, this his fabulous pixelated character, male character that jumps off in the blackness of night, just jumps into the blackness, and it's all pixelated with light. And actually when I heard that he had died or had killed himself, I thought right back to that image, in early 79. I said, boy, I'm not surprised. He was so obsessed by that image, you know, the connotation of that image, jumping off into the night. Matt, the hypnotist, that was, oh my God, powerful. It was especially powerful because his mother was there. And his mother, I sat next to her. He hired a hypnotist to hypnotize him into 4 different ages of his life, and then he would act out who he was at that age as a performance. And the first age was 5. The second was in his 30s. The third was in his 60s, and the fourth was in his 80s. And his mother freaked out. His mother was so frightened by it. I can imagine seeing your son act his life out, way beyond his years. But at age 5, he started playing with a train set, and it wasn't there. I mean, he was making it up, but it was so real. He was so in that state that I went up and played with him. It was just like, I want to play with that kid. It was really great. Mike Smith did the diapered, the baby Icky. And then Christine and I started curating, and we did a show with Mike Kelly and David Askable. We asked them to partner, and they did the Poltergeist, which was very experimental and uncanny, very almost voodoo-like. David was very into kind of this meta dark spiritualism, and Mike followed pretty easily. It was a pretty interesting show. It was a show and performances and screenings of video by them. David.
He was also both places.
David was a regular. He was a full-time faculty at NSCAD.
Uh-huh.
Gary Kennedy, who was the president of NSCAD, and he was a Canadian conceptual artist, very young. Had this idea to start. He was invited to be the director, and he had this idea to turn the school inside out, because it had been there already maybe 50, 60 years, but very conventional. And he turned it into, he just asked all of his favorite artists to come, his age, and they were all very interesting people, many of whom became very active in the next few years internationally. But at that time, they were just experimenting. They were just exploring. There was no hype. There was no hierarchy. There was no. Students were not intimidated by anybody. You could you could sit and talk and have coffee with anybody. It was a very open, relaxed environment, and it taught me to be like that. So I have a hard time in the world, of course, because the world's not like that. But it was then. It was. David was a full-time instructor. He taught this amazing class called Projects that was kind of before post-studio or new genre or whatever all those names started becoming. And it was about his work, and he had a very cult following. And then he came to CalArts, I think it was in 78, 79, something like that, for a year. He also was at UC Irvine for a year or two. And he had a lot of young artists. He's a very cult hero to a lot of people, even back then. He left LA in about 80, 81. He didn't stay very many years. He's kind of a mythology to a lot of people, actually, that he really affected. He did a show at LAICA. It was a show that was together with Richard Long and Michael Asher. And I was in the Michael Asher part. Michael basically did what he was doing at that time. He didn't do anything. He never showed up. He just pulled chairs together in a seating area, and he invited several students to be there in 4-hour blocks all day. So two student blocks per day, every day of the exhibition, to talk about art amongst ourselves. And we ended up talking about him, of course, because we were in his context and his frame. We chewed on that a lot. And David's work was in the gallery right next door, and he had a video playing on repeat, and it was one of his really crazy video documentaries of some crazy guys he'd met in Halifax. And I remember the soundtrack was like ping pong, Mr. Ping Pong, ping pong. And this was coming in and out of Michael's piece and Richard Long's piece, which was very serene and emptied out. And, you know, so the three of them, it was very interesting. And that show was put together by Tom Jimerson. I was always interested in dialogue because back then New York was at the center of the art universe. And LA, at least the LA, I and my friends were not really interested in what was going on at LA. Like, not that it's bad art, it just was not our genre, our training, you know, like the Ferris Gallery and the Light and Space. Some of it was interesting, but it wasn't ideational enough, you know. It wasn't kind of discourse and dialectical, and we were all like schooled in that, so we're hungry for it. And I also recognized that everything we were reading, at CalArts we were reading semiotext, you know, and it was Sylvain Lotringer that introduced, in the mid-70s, hot off the press, all the French guys, you know, and we were just reading them from the books. No one knew what the hell, you know, who they were, where they came from, how they got there, what the context was. None of that. It was just reading straight out of the books and then trying to figure out, how do I make art after reading this stuff? So most people didn't make art. We decided immediately after the season that we would give the space up. I hated working there. It just felt so artificial. You know, fitting everything into the same. I just didn't like it.
The limitations of the space.
Yeah. Yeah. So Christine and I decided at the end of '79 to just give it up and work out of a telephone and see what we could do in finding partners in the world. It just, you know, we would go and knock on people's doors that we didn't know, or, you know, I had this idea to do Art Talk Art, which I think was one of the most important things that I personally did at FAR, was to start this speakers forum at the Pacific Design Center. And, you know, who went to the Pacific Design Center to knock on the door of the CEO, you know, to say, hey, we have this idea, artists, it's for artists, and, you know, and we'd like to use your marquee outside, and we'd like you to give us your auditorium, and it'll bring you all kinds of clients that have never been here before, blah, blah. And everybody that we asked said yes. It was not an issue. Whether it was the zoo or the downtown library, we did a reading room by Dan Graham at the downtown library, which was great. We just realized, oh my God, all you have to do is ask. You have to have a great idea. You have to position it so that they're equal with you. You're not asking for handouts. You know, you really want partnership. And we were able to do anything we wanted. Another favorite thing of mine was Louise Lawler's show. She wanted to show a film without turning the projector on, and so that it would show through sound. So I found the Arrow Theater in Santa Monica, and we advertised it, and people showed up, and we chose The Misfits because it was Clark Gable's last performance and Marilyn Monroe's first performance, and everybody in America knows their voices. So this was really cool. I love this work. And, you know, everybody was in the auditorium, lights went down, curtains opened, projector rolls, the bulb never gets turned on, but the movie plays through sound. Nobody left. Nobody left. And it was artists and public, because it was on their marquee for, you know, the week. I loved it. A movie without a picture. A movie without a picture, yeah. I have photographs of it. So it was very fun doing FAR back then. You know, it was just spinning out ideas that what we were interested in, and it was the kinds of things we were educated to at CalArts, and certainly NSCAD, where I'd been there. And it was a chance to call anybody you wanted. I mean, it was so cool to have all this, you have this authority to just go to New York, knock on the door, talk to anybody you're interested in. And I met so many people. You know, they're still friends of mine. So it was pretty great. When I realized that we were all readers, and we had no discourse, no dialogue with the writers, or the writers, whether it's Art Forum, the magazines, or the artists that were on the pages. There was no dialogue. It was just we were fed. It was like we're consuming it, and it just always felt like wrong. I want to meet these people. If I'm gonna eat from their table, I want to meet them. This is like old European. I want to know who they are. So that's why we did Art Talk Art, which brought people into this huge discourse.
So, what about the other alternative spaces in LA?
At that time?
At that time. I mean, there's
some serious business
uh,
that nobody remembers. But it wasn't a space, again. It was, and it, having gone to some of the events that they produced, there's 3 women, and they really acted like producers and agents. And they put together pretty amazing performative events at public sites. And they were very successful at it. And they were around not long, maybe 2 or 3 years. And I had remembered that. I was a student, and I would go to their events. And when it came time to think about how far I should go, I said, no question. We have to go the way they went. They were much more business savvy. They came from PR, and they're not artists. They really knew what they were doing. We didn't. So it was like at a different level with a different, financing, different finances, different numbers for sure. But we got, so the other spaces, so SSB was not a space. There was LAICA, of course, that was kind of the largest kind of professional young artist space. Lace was much more fly by the seat of your pants than LAICA was. LAICA was they tried to turn themselves into a kind of institute, and of course they were run by Bob and his wife's name, but they were very business professional. They were not artists. Again, they came from a different place. I have a story. 78. Yes. Bob Smith created a symposium or a conference.
all right.
New
About
art
the
space.
about the art space, right.
That was the beginning of the idea of artist spaces, and he wanted to create an organization, a network organization. And I remember, as an artist, receiving in the mail, the pamphlet invitation, and it cost $65 to get in. Back then, in '78, that was a lot of money. I didn't have it. My friends didn't have it. So I started thinking, I'm not a troublemaker, but I think a lot about why things are the way they are and how else they could be, especially if they involve me. So I said to myself, what artist is going to go to this? And this is supposed to be about artist spaces, And I noticed reading the pamphlet that there was only one unaffiliated artist, unaffiliated meaning they're not a director of a space, or they haven't, were an artist and now they're curators, or unaffiliated, not with an institution. Only one, and it was Lawrence Weiner. He's affiliated with many, but he's not himself an institution. Although you could argue that, I guess.
Now he is.
Now he is. Yeah, back then it was Lawrence. It was just Lawrence. So that didn't make any sense to me. How can you have a discussion about artist spaces without including artists in the discussion itself? Inviting them into the discussion, not just as audience. So I wrote a postcard to 100 people in LA. They were peers, people in the arts that I knew because I had worked for the gallery. I knew people. 60 people, and I wrote on the front of it, "Do you really think you're a part of this?"
You're not a troublemaker?
I'm not a troublemaker. Do you think I'm a troublemaker? Tom, do you No, I just say what I think.
You just ask a question.
I ask a question. I guess people perceive that as making trouble. I question, I do. So I sent this out, you know, and it was about, can we meet and talk about what's happening here? You know, it's happening in Santa Monica. 60 people showed up to this first meeting. You know, that's a lot of people out of 100, you know? And they were all like equally pissed. I said, aha, I'm not the only one. It's just, I asked the question, right? And we decided, all kinds of people were part of it. Morgan Fisher, you know, artists who are still around. And we decided to go to the inaugural dinner. Oh, first, we called and asked Bob if he would allow us like 5 minutes to talk. You know, he had a panel of people the first night. We asked, just give us 5 minutes. We're artists, you know. Why don't you want us there?
All 60 of you? I mean,
No,
or
to have
who
a
was the
representative of us give a 5-minute talk.
Oh.
And he said no. So then we got, okay, now. He said no. We gave him an opportunity. He said no. What are we going to do? Go home? No. So we decided to rent 60 folding chairs and to go to the inaugural dinner and to surround them by us. To sit around them in our chairs and watch them. And so we did that. It was some fancy hotel in Santa Monica. I always thought it was the Biltmore, but it's not the Biltmore. It was something else.
He told us it's the Miramar.
Miramar. Yeah, Miramar. And one person on the panel, Jim Doherty. Do you remember Jim Doherty?
No.
He was the first president of the NEA. He was a good guy. He was a ceramicist, older man. He noticed us. He was the only person that when it was his time to speak, and he was going to talk about the NEA, he said, I see some people sitting on the periphery over there. I'd like to give up my time to you. And he leaves. He sits down and gives us his mic. But we had counted on actually talking. We just wanted to sit. We didn't go that far. I mean, this is like young artists, you know, what do you expect? So we all looked at each other like, who's gonna go up? They pushed me forward because it was my question to begin with. Well, I'd never talked in public before. I got up there and my voice froze. It was like, nothing came out, not even, excuse me, I can't talk. It was just like, nothing. It was so humiliating. Morgan Fisher came up to my side. Thank God. He said, Dorit, I'll take the mic. He took the mic and talked. He said the things that we had all talked about. And it was very powerful because we asked the questions that needed to be asked.